Okay, so yesterday we talked about cyber threats and we talked about the bad actors having different motives, means, and methods, right? Uh, and it could vary, motives can vary from financial gain to just having fun. And and the means, again, the tools that they would use, and the methods is the how, basically. So now we're on module 4. We're going to talk about risk management. And usually when we talk about risk management as well, um, and as part of security, it should be including all the cyber and the physical as well, right? So before we start, as usual, we'll talk about some news. So in this article, FBI warns that hackers are targeting hospitals while coronavirus admissions surge. So it's kind of like a perfect storm where we're having the COVID-19, and then at the same time, um, it's the for the hackers, it would be the best time to attack as well, right? So hospitals are being attacked by a new onslaught of ransomware, right? Meaning a new wave of ransomware, right? So an alert from FBI said on Wednesday there's an imminent threat of ransomware on American hospital and healthcare providers. As we already have defined, ransom is basically locking up a system's computer, right? And data until a ransom is paid. Let's make this a bit bigger. Okay. However, they still don't know who are responsible for the attacks, right? It was linked to Russian criminal groups before. Okay. Um, it also comes from it's called Ryuk ransomware. So we can check what is Ryuk ransomware. I only know this from Death Note. So it is a name once unique to fictional character in popular Japanese comic book and cartoon series. Let's see. Okay, so with the Ryuk ransomware, it does target big financial theft, right? And they call it big game hunting, right? When you say big game hunting, um, when people go out on the hunt, when they say big game, it's the large animals that they hunt, right? So it's a big high investment for them. The return on investment for them is high. That's why they want to do it. So to date, the Ryuk ransomware is um, hailed as the costliest among its peers, right? So it means that it's known that it's the costliest, right? So it's first of the kind incident response company specializing in ransomware. The asking price is 10 times the average, which is pretty scary. Okay, so looks like they don't really have a lot of information on that one. So Ryuk is believed to be behind, right, of that ransomware attack on UHS, right, Universal Health Services, which own 400 facilities across US and UK. It said that it didn't harm any of its patients, so it did not attack the life support systems, and that it delayed getting crucial information about patient care and communication. Okay. Anyway, so just to summarize why hospitals were the target, again, they make good targets for ransomware. Why? Because they're likely to pay the ransom as quickly as possible. Why? Because if they don't get access to the systems right away, right, there's a lot of death or life situations that can happen. Right. See, an example is in the UK National Health Service, where it costed millions of dollars and around 20,000 patients were canceled. Their appointments were canceled, right, because the system was offline. Okay, so the next stuff is, so how can healthcare organizations combat ransomware? I think you will be expecting the same things, right? Again, the common security practices are one of the reliable ones as well, right? So it shows here to, oops, adopt a layered approach to cybersecurity, right? When we say layer, when it's like when you're putting clothes, you put your inner shirt, then your shirt, and then jacket, right? And then maybe more, right? So that's a layered approach to cybersecurity, where you build defense upon defense upon defense, right? You can do antivirus and then firewalls and then web filters, right? So each time you put a layer, it reduces the vulnerability of your organization. Um, However, I think I remember something. Um, cheese, cyber defense. Cheese cyber. So there's an interesting model called the Swiss cheese model, right? It's the cheese. So this is something that people has to know as well, right? Why did they call this Swiss cheese? Because the Swiss cheese usually has holes, right? And if you put layers upon layers of defense, right? And let's say in each layer, it's not properly set up or configured, those holes would be a vulnerability, right? And let's say you also have antivirus, but let's say you have the same hole for the firewall and the antivirus. Let's say, meaning in the firewall, you did not configure it correctly, and the firewall gives access to, let's say, your app to that, um, let's say to your HR app, right, where you have employee information. And let's say you also have your antivirus, but it also failed to protect your um, HR software. Maybe it's not scanning that HR software. So the loss is not really prevented if you do layered improperly, right? Let's see more quick images here. See, it always goes through, right? So make sure when you create a layer of defense that you don't implement like a Swiss cheese model, right? So it's called Swiss cheese cybersecurity, right? Okay. Oops, I exit that out. So heading back, the number two is rethink business continuity, right? Um, Again, sometimes the threats are very imminent, right? And let's say the impact and likelihood is so high that that type of risk is likely to happen. If that's the case, you might want to do some business continuity planning in such a way that you may back up data, right? Weekly or daily, right? And make sure that it's continuous, right? It's just not one time thing. You do it regularly. Next, we come from the cybersecurity training to your employees, right? And one of it is phishing training to make sure they know um, what looks like a phishing in the email, right? So again, help awareness for the pitfalls. And for those who are not yet familiar, phishing is basically, I guess these are just cool images, but you get the understanding, right? A phishing attack. And just so you know, if phishing attack usually casts a wide net, meaning it tries to attack everyone at the same time and hoping for someone to get lucky and click it. And usually people also do what they call spear phishing, right? Oops, phishing. I think there might be a good example before. Spear phishing versus phishing. Here, I think this is a good image, right? So as you can see, phishing only is for a broad automated attack. It is less sophisticated. And sometimes they use this to maybe gather information only, not to attack right away. And once they got enough information, they can do a customized attack on a specific employee and company. An example, let's say in a company, right? We happen to fish one employee who really loves cat photos, right? Now we have that information. We can now do a customized attack, which is spear phishing. We just target that one employee and make sure the spam is all about cat photos because the likelihood of that person clicking is higher. Right? So that is phishing versus spear phishing. Okay. Strengthen employee passwords. So um, another good thing to teach to employees is this phrase: treat your password like your toothbrush, right? So when you treat a password like a toothbrush, you choose a good one. You don't share it with anyone, and you change it occasionally, right? So that's one of the things that you can keep saying to the employees for them to understand that it's like a toothbrush. You have to change, right? And you don't share it. Okay, Trojan malware. Trojan Horse is basically where you trick someone, right? For them to install something, right? And then when you open that up, and then the virus propagates. Right? Okay. See, make multi-factor authentication mandatory. Just setting up two-factor authentication really increases the layer of security, right? Only permit remote access via a virtual private network. Okay, so you do have to understand that as a organization, you should not just let your employee connect to your internal systems right away. Better to use a VPN so that the connection is secure and would avoid eavesdropping, meaning bad actors doing man in the middle attack. Okay, so those are just some of the tips, right? And those are going to be very helpful for those healthcare organizations. Okay, now the news is done. Let's start with the textbook, right? So for the textbook, the outcome is to use a risk management approach, right? For responding and recovering from a cyber attack on systems that holds high value information and assets, right? That's the whole point. We do want to protect assets because they are valuable and there's a lot of consequences if they're basically rendered useless, right? Another outcome is to apply tools and use concept to minimize risk to an organization's cyberspace to address cybersecurity threats. Okay. Review system vulnerabilities that can leave a system or network open to attack. Right? Complete a risk assessment and know the importance of risk assessment. Okay, so we've shown this diagram, right, where there's threat on the leftmost and there's risk on the rightmost, right? For the threat, usually people think about threat and risk are the same, right? Again, the difference with threat and risk, threat is like a danger, right? From, let's say, from something, there's a danger on that, right? Which the asset has vulnerabilities and the danger is the threat, right? After you have that and you basically have the impact and the likelihood of that happening, if you put that together, now it becomes a risk, right? But again, most of the time in English, we don't really use threat. So again, let's say instead of like the threat of rain, people still say risk of rain. But once you go risk management and maybe cybersecurity assessment, you really have to define what threat and what is risk. Differentiate them, right? So again, asset is a new thing that we don't really discuss a lot, but basically those are your systems, right? Your applications or your HVAC, your air conditioning, your IoT devices, and etc. So there you go. Also, people are part of assets, right? Vulnerabilities, there are intrinsic and extrinsic, right? Intrinsics are inherent, meaning they are built in the very nature of an asset, such as the ease of erasing information from magnetic media. As I mentioned before, if you do have a hard disk drive with that has the spinning platter, right? If you do know that you can easily erase that, right? By destroying or putting a heavy magnet. Extrinsic vulnerabilities are those that are poorly applied, such as software that is out of date due to lack of patching or vulnerable due to poor coding practice, right? So this is now intrinsic is more of like you're not using the asset in the proper way or maintaining it in the proper way. Thus, it now had extrinsic vulnerabilities. Whereas in intrinsic, right, even though you're doing the best practices to maintain it, you would still have those vulnerabilities just because that's how the asset was built. Likelihood or probability, again, it's a bit interchangeable as well. But when we say likelihood, it's more subjective, meaning it's just a opinion maybe or a guess from experience. But when we say probability, usually there's a percentage or a number attached, right? And that makes it more objective. So the first one is the chance that something will happen is likelihood, right? And the second one that has the 25% chance of a data breach, that's more of a probability. So in risk management, you first want to create a lot of this, what they call different risk matrix, right? Or matrices, right? So in the first column, it shows the level of likelihood, right? So from not gonna happen to it's likely gonna happen, right? And now you would have other columns here, and we can check one by one, right? So let's say for hacking, malware, and social engineering, so an event that they put as maybe not gonna happen, right, is once a week. For environmental, the maybe that it's not likely to happen would be a decade, meaning 10 years. An example of this, it could be a flooding, earthquake, right? Next, we have the errors, failures, and misuse. Let's say once a month, an employee messes up on how to use it correctly, right? And then down, let's go down to the very likely, going column by column again. For the hacking part, the event is likely to occur at any time, right? So I'll give example. So the very unlikely could be uh, spear phishing, a customized attack, right? A very likely could be a regular spam phishing attack, right? Environmental, let's say big flooding, earthquake, very likely is it could occur anytime. It could rain, right? It could rain hard. No. So in errors and failures, the very likely part, if this is once a month, let's say once a month is not updating or not doing backups, right? The very likely to happen is could be the employee forgets to lock his screen, maybe forgets his access ID, right? Okay, so we do have impact. Impact is basically estimated potential losses, and it can include money, time, and others, right? And now, if you create the very same matrix again with the level of impact on the first column, right? And you have operational, financial, legal, and regulatory, and also reputational, right? So let's look at operational. Let's say partial loss of a single service, right? Um, Single service could be negligible, right? Maybe users don't even see that it is happening, right? Maybe let's say in your website, um, for example, let's say a website, mm, for example, Amazon.com. Let's say this part is not working, the banner, totally fine. It's not really gonna affect a lot, right? But let's say the very high total loss of all services, if the website all goes down, and that is now very costly to the business, right? So in financial, that's already tying into the operational part, right? Total loss of service, then you'll get a lot of losses too, right? Next is legal and regulatory. Again, this depends on countries, right? Some countries doesn't really have like penalties or fines because maybe they don't have enough laws that were implemented, right? But for example, if they're basically operating in European Union, where they need to comply to GDPR, which is a very strict data privacy law, they could end up paying a lot, right? If let's say the impact is very high, right? Let's say data breach of like 1 million users, that's going to be high. And also reputational, the higher the impact, right? It means it's more global. The lower the impact means maybe no one even notices it. The low one is, let's say, in your local city only, right? So if we come back again, like if we have like, let's say, an election issue that usually becomes not only national, but it becomes global as well, right? Okay, so we do have another diagram, right? It looks like there's a lot going on, but usually you can just focus on the inner dotted line box, right? And it says risk assessment. And in risk assessment, you have three things. You have the identification, the analysis, and evaluation. And it's just saying that there's a lot of contributing factors to building each of them. For example, in risk identification, you do need to know where you're starting from, the context establishment, right? Uh, Listing all the things, right? And then identifying which are the ones that are risk, right? And you also want to communicate and consult that with, let's say, the manager, the department, right? The team. Monitoring and review is a thing that you constantly have to, even though you have already executed it, you also need someone to review and even monitor that, right? Are we doing the correct thing? So that is same for risk analysis and evaluation, right? With the only thing after evaluation is the risk treatment. And it cycles again and again, right? So per ISACA, right? And they said that there are three things: the risk identification, analysis, and evaluation, right? And identification, you want to identify assets and value, right? And then identify risks associated to those assets, such as the threats and vulnerabilities. Then perform an analysis, right? With qualitative, meaning more subjective, and quantitative, meaning more objective assessment. So next is you want to combine the impact and likelihood so that you can really see what is um, the the risk impact, right? So you want to create a risk rating of 1 to 5, like the very low to very high, right? And also do some prioritization, right? Which one is most meaningful to your business? So after you have the analysis, you do have the evaluation, and you want to decide how to deal with the risk based on priority, right? There's risk avoidance or termination. An example of that is, uh, let's say, if we put a data center on this certain island, the risk of getting tsunami is very high. So you just avoid it. You just maybe go to a different place that doesn't have a tsunami, right? So if you think about it, it's a really, really simple solution but most of the time it's so hard to move from one place to another because of maybe um, contracts, the value there is cheaper, and so on and so forth. Right? Risk sharing is very common, right? You not only see this in cybersecurity, right? For example, health risk, right? You don't want to pay everything on your own because it's super, super costly. Same thing as with cars, right? Meaning if something happens, so what people do is they go sign up for an insurance, right? A car insurance or a health insurance, so that they pay less. And in the event of something bad happens, someone can shoulder the risk, meaning someone can pay up to help the person. This is the same thing as when you're using the cloud, right? So I believe all cloud providers are doing this. So let's say Amazon Web Services, which is a cloud provider, meaning you can have infrastructure, platform, or software in the cloud, and basically they would host it. Let's see if we can zoom this better, right? Zoom this more. Okay, so this is basically risk sharing, right? If you're doing your traditional IT server room, right, or you create your own data center, right, you basically handle all the risks. You handle the risk of the hardware and the software, right? But if you basically use a cloud service provider like AWS or Alibaba Cloud, right? There's this shared responsibility, meaning the risks are basically shared, right? As for the provider, the AWS in this case, they are responsible for security of the cloud, meaning because they own the hardware, right, and they do own the some of the software, right. They're gonna use, right. So if anything happens, let's say their data centers got flooded or they got a attack in their data centers, yes, they would be responsible for that. And then they would be the one paying up for the cost of the impact, right? But as a customer, right, the responsibility of security in the cloud, it means that yes, you are using their cloud services, but whatever you put there that is not secure, you're responsible for that. So if you do lose customer data because let's say you put the customer data in, let's say, a storage service, and then you did not put it in private, then it's your fault, right? You're the one who's gonna pay up for it. Okay, so that's the responsible shared responsibility model. And maybe I'll just add that here for later. And then we do have the risk reduction. We also have the risk reduction is it's pretty straightforward. You want to reduce the risk, right? Risk acceptance and tolerance, it means you're fine with the risk that's going to happen and you are prepared for it, right? And then you do have the uh, residual risk where um, you couldn't really completely remove the risk, right? So meaning, for example, um, let's go back to the data center thing, right? Where you let's say you avoided because of tsunami, right? How about let's say that same island, but um the risk is earthquake, right? You could try to look for a place where maybe there's no history of getting an earthquake, right? But still, there's this residual risk that again, anyone in the earth, any place in the earth can have an earthquake, right? So you couldn't really make the risk as 0%. So that's what it's saying. Okay. So before we continue on, we'll touch on some of the muddiest points. So from Whiskey asks, how much is the minimum and maximum cost of a project risk assessment probably be? I'm curious about it. So usually if it's in-house, meaning if you do have a risk manager, it's basically the risk manager's salary. But I guess this question is more on what if I hire somebody outside, right? So it really depends, right? I researched on this and there's many things and I don't like that there's a lot of wall of text. So let me just fix it quickly. So it really depends, right, on a lot of factors, right? Um, let's say the risk object assessment objectives, right? So what do you want to cover, right? The scope, right? Because you don't want to just say, well, check everything in my company. No, you want to start somewhere. Let's say I want to check for a team, right? Next is also the size of or your organization. Because if it's small, uh, again, they might not charge for a big thing because they don't really need to identify a lot of things as well, right? And then next is basically a security test, right? And security tests and projects to be performed, compliance level objectives. So it depends because you can also say that can you do risk assessment on my company, and can you try to do an assessment using let's say the GDPR so that I can operate in Europe with no problem, right? So that increases the price, right? Because it increases the complexity to do the assessment. Next is this is from the source, right? So it could range from $8,000 to $50,000, right? Again, that would depend. So that's just a estimate. So from Stephen, I'm interested in the standby system here. In this case, the system is any involved organization service system. If a company find the contracted outside company's big data network security organization, a safety problem is involved. Organization, so maybe here, a period, and then organizations may secretly back up system data files and sold to others. So look for outside contractor safety information organization. Must be cautious. Can find unknown. So I guess I don't really know what's the summary here. So make sure you try to end your sentences as well. Sold to others. So look for other contractor. Yeah. So it's fine if you can also send me a message so I can answer this or maybe understand it better. So for Porygon, he says, I think I like the likelihood or probability, right? Because it's not fixed, has countless combination, which interests me a lot. So he likes randomness. So it's going to be hard for the risk manager, right? They usually want something as a percentage. I have a feeling of infatuation for this kind of regular things. For me, random events can arouse my interest, such as Pokemon battle. Uh, I may disagree. Pokemon battles are pretty straightforward. It's like a complex rock paper scissors. So you can really I guess you're right that you can add probability and likelihood for what the Pokemon would do. Would the Pokemon switch out? Would it use a weakness attack? Right? So I guess you're right. Right? The more, I guess, the more you put that in the game perspective, the more fun it is. I guess. So for Alan, as cybersecurity awareness increases, vulnerability issues become more of a concern. Right? Will the job market demand for software testing position increase? So the first one is, as the cybersecurity awareness increases, uh, it could happen that they discover more vulnerabilities, right? And it will also become more of a concern, meaning they try their best to be aware that these things happen. So that is true. And the next one is, when job market demand for software testing position increase. Um, I kind of doubt it, meaning maybe not, because right now there's a lot of testing that can happen. One is because of automations, also maybe the use of machine learning and automation for software testing. Also, before, back in the days, we used this separation between developers and IT or operations. And now, most of the time, as software developers, they require you to know testing as well, right? So I'll show you a quick picture of what do we mean by that. Yeah, so traditionally, it looks like this, where the developer passes his code or application to the ops, meaning the IT team. The IT team would be maybe the one testing it and deploying it, etc. Right? But now with the DevOps, let's see. Okay, so here's a good thing. So before, right, they throw in the code and you do it on your own, right? But now the development is, um, every time there's a deployment or maybe a test, operation is already part of it. And again, because development and operations are part of it, most of the times as well, you do have one person doing this as well. And that's why you have the DevOps, right? And also, as software developers, they're using this test driven development where you do tests before you even push code, right? So you create test cases before you write code. Instead of write code, then write, and then someone would write the test case. Okay. So I doubt there's more requirement of software testers, right? But yes, for machine learning, I believe so. Okay. Okay, now I think it's a good time for a stopping point. So when we come back, I'll show you a risk assessment case study, and then do lecture, and then maybe continue on to Maria's point. So let's see you in 15 minutes. Next up, we do have risk mitigation, right? In mitigation, there are several controls. There are detective, directive, preventative, and corrective. Right. Detective is allowing us to be aware once something has happened, so, or happening. Okay, so it's past or the present. Directive controls invoke some form of procedure that must be followed, right? So, so basically, the directive is something in the future that you must keep doing in the present as well. Preventative controls, which is stopping something from happening. Again, that is in the future. right? Corrective controls is putting a fix to a problem after it has happened. So it is past, right? So now you can see that detective and corrective controls are reactive in nature, meaning they only work when something happens, right? They would only do these controls when something is happened, right? For directive and preventative, they are basically um, proactive in nature. When we say proactive, they're basically looking ahead in the future and trying to prepare for that, right? So again, risk mitigation, the word itself, it means that you do want to reduce the risk, right? You do want to reduce the exposure to the risk, the impact, or the consequence, right? So there's three ways to implement control. There's procedural control, right? So it takes what action must be taken in a particular situation. This is an example, like um, how how often, right? And it should be in a regular basis where users are required to change their system access password, right? Next is physical control. Very easy, making sure the server room is locked, right? It prevents unauthorized entry, maybe adding an access key card control. Technical controls is more on the system side, such as the hardware and software, right? Such as configuring your firewall rules, right? So you just don't allow anyone to access your system. So in risk mitigation, we have this PDCA, meaning plan, do, check, and act, right? You prepare, you execute, you monitor, right? And then you do another action. Right? So again, when I say prepare, execute, monitor, and then the last one is again take action. Right? You basically validate the plans and use it into action. Okay, so these are the resources, I guess. Before the writing exercise, let me show you a risk assessment case study. Slide. So this is um, one of my group paper when I was taking a security class in CDU. I just changed the name to protect the investment bank firm, but it is an investment bank firm, a small one, right? So first, just an overview. It's basically an investment bank. An investment bank basically does mergers and acquisitions, right? They basically cater to businesses selling their business, and there's a buyer, right? And so one thing you have to do is you want to do an assessment, right? So in this case, we check the assets, right? And there's our operating system. You check the version, the system information, the network connection, the password complexity being used, the PIN code, check the number of assets, check the number of laptops, the printers. I think I need to escape the presentation mode so I can see more of it. Maybe this. Okay. Okay, so another thing is at the bottom here, it says the location of the hubs, routers, and switches are at the cabinet shelf. Printers are connected wireless. Okay, put that back to percent. Okay, so applications used as well. They're using Microsoft 365 and some financial softwares where their backups is, files, what type of backup they use, one big external drive, building security for their office security, software security, Microsoft because they're using the Microsoft ecosystem, the access to the office, right? Needs only to unlock the reception area by a key access to access all rooms, right? And there's no dedicated administrator because it is a small investment bank. There's only one analyst that is in charge with all the facilities. The next thing I mapped out is basically create the layout of their office. So again, the entry point is on the lower right. And as you can see, once you gain access to the reception, all of these rooms are actually not locked and just easily accessed, right? So you would see where the PCs are and where's the routers and network. So you would know where your point of entry and maybe do some destruction if you're a bad actor. As for taking the photos of inside of it, so they don't even have a dedicated room for their IT system. So it's just near the pantry area, so like the kitchen. So now you already know what are some of the risks with it being near a kitchen, right? And even the wirings. Someone could accidentally step in. So when you do risk assessment, you also look at like how the policies and procedures they do, right? For example, management supervision. Do they put any security plan, right? There's none, right? Do they have business continuity plan? There's none, right? So again, because some small businesses think that, well, we're not big in a way, so we don't have to prepare for that. So that's a big red flag. So personal security, they don't really do background checks on employees, which they should, because you can also do it that quickly online. Photo ID is a yes, but they don't have a physical ID badge, right? Um, they at least delete security access, right, for employees upon termination. Physical security. So during business hours, there's no lock on the building, right? Anyone can access without key cards. Is security maintained after business hours? Yes. After 7 p.m., do you have to have access key to enter, right? But they don't have sufficient alarm system. They don't even have security camera. And again, this risk is more of in the building, not really in their office space. Next, you want to identify information assets, meaning the data that they have, right? You would have the low, medium, and high. And the low risk information is, let's say, your customer data, personal data, but it's publicly available. Let's say emails, company emails, it's fine. It's fine if that gets released, right? Medium risk, these are data that includes the PII, right? Let's say the social security number, right? And also the phone number, office policy, vendor information. A high risk data would be confidential records, right? Includes the transaction of the business, right? And so on and so forth. Another thing that you want to check is the level of risk per item, right? And as you can see, you can associate a low, medium, high, right, with the level of risk. For, let's say, the PII, it's a high risk because they just store it in a unlocked file cabinet, right? Business information, vendor. So this one is fine. Public facing website is medium because they don't really have a lot of sensitive information. It's just information for them to know what the business is doing, not really customer data. So network security. So check if they have firewalls. Yes. Did they change the default admin password? Yes. But do they update antivirus and do virus scanning for email? No and no, and no regular security patches. For the network servers, they do have unique user IDs and password, but they don't have multi-factor authentication. They do use shared login, which is pretty bad. Let's say there's another employee, they just use sometimes the same credential, right? So let's say, so they don't also monitor logging attempts that are unsuccessful. Email is not encrypted. So is the email used to send or receive sensitive information? That's also a yes. So now you can also check for the wireless remote access. So at least they don't have remote desktop connection or remote access to their network. So that's a no. They do have a wireless network. Is the wireless network secure with WPA2? Yes, like the password. Sensitive information on the website, that's a no. No payment card handling, that's a no. So they don't need to comply to the uh, payment standard law, like the PCI DSS. Storage of sensitive data. Yes, they do store sensitive data in a lot of their computers and systems, but they don't really encrypt it, right? So disposal of information, yes, they do it um, at least annually. Um, we don't know how their sensitive information is permanently destroyed. Paper checks and records, they're shredded. That's good, right? Data is permanently removed before equipment is sold or discarded. No, like I have mentioned that they have to really destroy the hard disk for it to be safe to be sold or discarded, right? Data breach. So they don't have backups facilities, right? In the event of failure, they don't have other servers. Let's see, where is your backup data stored? None. Uh, Backup media is moved to a secure offsite storage location? No. Right, and so on and so forth. They don't have intrusion detection system. So security summary, as I mentioned, that access is allowed until 7 p.m. Then you need a key card, right? The during office hours, entry door is unlocked, easy to go to. So the switches and routers are exposed in the pantry area. Pantry has microwave, fridge, sink, dishwasher. People don't lock their PCs, right, and share passwords. Conference room is where they meet clients and buyers, and they usually talk with sensitive information, but their walls are not soundproof. And this is one of the activity that we're gonna do today. We're gonna go ahead and create a risk matrix. So this is just an example, right? So from left to right, if it's something that we should not think about, to something that we should address right away, or I mean, address. The impact is very big. Again, negligible, low impact, and catastrophic is very high impact. On the first column, you would have the rows that would definitely say that the certain, it means it's very likely to happen, and the rare is very unlikely to happen. Now, just to show some examples, let's go for the high impact but rare to happen. Fire destroys paper files and electronic files. So if there's fire on the office space or building, that is very catastrophic. They would lose all data, but it's pretty rare to happen. Another thing that is catastrophic but is likely to happen: accidental file deletion of important transaction, let's say by an employee, right? Another that is critical to their business is it's likely that their hubs, routers, and switches can get damaged because again, it's just in the pantry area, right? Unauthorized access to premises, it also is critical, but it's possible, right? Because again, um, people can just enter without access key during the day. Next is power loss, temporary power loss. It would affect, but not a lot. And also, it's unlikely because they do have, um, actually, they don't have UPS, uninterruptible power supply. So it's going to affect them. Okay, so that should be good for the matrix. So risk discovered, we already mentioned these ones, right? These are the same. Another matrix could be used is you have the threat agent, the action, and the impact and likelihood, right? So this is another type of matrix, right? We can just choose a few, right? Let's say rooms not soundproof. That is enabling for eavesdropping, meaning people can maybe listen or record the session. And the impact is moderate, and the likelihood is medium. Because again, that's why it's moderate, because not all meetings generally talk about sensitive data as well, so it's not that high. Next is we can do IT network equipment not secured, right? Access device damage, destroy, and steal. That's high, right? Because it will render the employees unable to do their work. And the likelihood again is medium. Okay, move on. And basically, after you do your assessment, right, you likely would want to do some recommendations, right? So one is maybe move the office to someone that's the building that's using key card entry only, right? Soundproof the room, secure the IT equipment, right? Remove physical printouts or keep them in locked cabinets, right? Back up their electronic files to the cloud. That increases their disaster recovery potential. Move user management to Azure Active Directory, which is a Microsoft cloud services product, right? And use Microsoft Intune to enforce PC encryption of hard drives, and so on and so forth. So there are alternative recommendations that you can also mention aside from your initial recommendation. This should be good for now. So you do want to mention your unresolved risk, right? So these are risks that you have not taken into account because it could be out of your scope, right? So what this one is now assessment of benefits. So you now see the residual impact and residual likelihood. I can just skip this and I'll just send this file as well. Checking if they have plans and policies in place. And conclusions and basically references. Okay, so this is the end for that risk assessment for that company. So we can now move on to this one, right? So spend 20 minutes, right? And after 20 minutes, please do send back the file so we can share it. So what I'll do is I do have this file, so I'm gonna drop it in the chat. Let's see. Okay, there it is. Hold on. And then I'll show you how it looks like. So the document would look like this, right? So I'd like you guys to think of a organization type. You can put it anywhere, maybe on the top. Let's say this one is, let's say, school, right? And also mentioned and just write a few words or sentences, right? Minimum of five. Will also help you practice doing risk assessment. Let's say extreme could result in disaster and risk will occur, or let's say unlikely to occur. Again, we can say fire, right? Fire damage, right? Um, and then let's say in schools, they have information. So if they're using an unsecured storage service, they might have serious impact, but possible, right? Expose, let's say, URLs to student data, right? Things like that. So you can be very creative here. You should think about scenarios, right? You can say that expose URLs to student data because due to using unsecured web services, right? Maybe fire damage due to no no fireproof walls, right? And we can say loss of physical and electronic data from fire. Okay, so those are two examples, and we'll check back in after 20 minutes and start with uh, Nick. Let's see. So I think he chose the game industry. Okay, so little to no effect. Computers power off, right? Risk is unlikely to occur. Little to no effect on event. This is given if the computer has a backup power supply. Um, uh, Company was burned. Yes, similar. Undesirable. Possible. Oh, okay. So maybe this during the game. Someone insults in the game. Yes. The impact though is maybe that's an impact on the psychological. Users cannot. Okay, someone insult. I guess another risk could be if you insult someone, you can get banned, right? Service unconnected. Possible, yes, because if their server is down, but I don't think that acceptable. Maybe it's undesirable, right? Because they would lose users on their servers. somebody uses the cheat, this is serious, right? If everyone cheats in the game and people don't want to play in that game anymore. Let's see another one. Gambling website. Risk is unlikely to occur. Website block, little to no effect on event. So website block. This is only this is would be a big impact, right? Because if the website is block, people who wants to do gambling, right? Again, whether it's good or not, you're thinking about for the system, right? For the gambling website application, right? It's not good for them because they're not going to get users. Website stuck as well, maybe not good because again, you're when if it's a gambling website, and again, think of it's the same as money, playing with money transfer. So that's very crucial. Um, Intolerable company running. I'm not sure what's this. So caught gambling by the police. Yes, this is a high impact. Um, Now the question is it highly likely? Um, I would say possible, but again, depends. Because if the probability is very high to be caught by police, I don't think people would do gambling. Mm, then again, maybe they still do the high risk underground gambling. So this could be right. Website jumps out of 404 page. So anything that would render the website not usable should be in the intolerable or undesirable, which is serious or a disaster, right? An example with a website that maybe is tolerable or acceptable, maybe let's say the one of the button that is not really important to using the gaming website, right, is broken. So that is acceptable. So game, mm, server is missing. Yes, if I try to understand, maybe the server was stolen physically. Yes, that's very improbable, but could result in a disaster. Um, so this you have to specify what, right? That makes it go bankrupt. What risk that would happen? A game bug. This can be correct, right? So for the game bug, you can basically put this in all, right? You just make sure, maybe you say um, a a very big bug, right? Or a bug that destroys user accounts, right? Or changes their money, their in-game money. So that is very serious or disaster, right? It is possible. But let's say you have a game bug that maybe just um, have a wrong description on an item that just may be tolerable. It's still playable, right? Game lag, yeah. So what would be the cause of game lag? Maybe high number of users, right? At the same time, unexpected high numbers of users, you can say that. And the impact would that be is yes, it could be tolerable. I agree because I still play with game lag, and usually the probability is high as well because not only their server but also the internet providers. Let's see. So this one, an ordinary person might suffer from online at home. So this is risk at home. Okay. Probability harassed by disguise ad low. Okay, that's correct. This is also um, maybe this is maybe tolerable because you felt harassed, right? Harassed by. So again, the word harass you maybe should put it in tolerable. Leakage of logging information, that should be more of undesirable, right? If that happens. Leakage of poor conductive or electronic equipment, that could lead to disaster, I would say, because that's electronic equipment. Unless this is just isolated, right? Okay. Next is what's this? Hmm. Hardware theft, improbable, vulnerable, yes. Power outage, undesirable. Both of them could be disaster, right? Fire data theft. Maybe when there's a fire and then someone does the data theft. Illegal server attacks through it's highly likely to happen and it's a disaster. Um, it could be it could be tolerable if you have a server attack, but you do have protection from denial of service. Okay. Next would be from Randy. Share that all the time. That help. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Yeah, not that one. Hold on, it opened up a lot of files. Okay, open this one. Share. Okay, so example from TNU, right? What's this? Environment accident. Natural disasters, including fires and floods, should usually be in the disaster, right? No one manages and intends to start firewall settings in the library. So that is extreme because, again, anyone can access. Yeah, you usually don't repeat them. You can just say maybe rain as a natural disaster or rain, then you have flood, and then earthquake is a bigger impact, right? Let's try another one. Let's try to share that preview. Internet cafes attacked by hackers, improbable. I would say more likely because internet cafes depend. It depends, but they might not have the best security too. I think because people can have physical access as well, and if it's attacked by hackers, it could result to disaster of the business. One thing to note about even though some of the effect looks like it's small, but if it's a small business, it could affect greatly. Internet virus implemented with Trojan virus. Yes, this is extreme and likely to happen. Let's check some more. Library. Okay. So loud noise. So again, with the scenarios you're thinking, whether it's a general risk or information risk, you have to think about the impact. And the impact to the library is more of like, can the library still function? Can the library still um, provide its service? So with that in mind, I guess this is true. Loud noise, it is possible. It's not unlikely. Anyone can shout, but it is acceptable. It doesn't affect the function of the library to not work, right? And encountered a rubber intrusion. So that is undesirable for sure. It could not be a disaster, right? Improbable as well if there's like a security. A fight is happening. Yes, that could render. That could be a serious impact as well because now the library staff has to be involved. This is a good risk actually. Not yeah, bookshelf. The whole bookshelf falls down and it's possible. And when it happens, I would say this is undesirable because the risk of having someone get a physical injury is possible as well. Fire broke out. You don't want, you want to put that as disaster because if the books get damaged, they can no longer render their library services, right? Oh, people overwhelmed by bookshelf. Not sure by that. See, preview. Was this the same? Yeah, I think this is the same for the first one. Hmm, You can check this one, the other one. Mhm. Okay, so the computer is not plugged in, and let's see, did he define which one is this? Not really. Well, if you're talking about let's say you're a computer shop or you're doing business with a computer, if the computer is not plugged in, I guess it is acceptable because you can easily just plug it in as long as it's not a critical server where there's critical information being requested. Computer cannot connect to the internet. I will put this as undesirable. Okay, maybe you're thinking about the effects on the computer. Okay. So for the medium system, computer system is naturally damaged, which is wear and tear. Okay. And then computer damage is, mm, maybe you can say damage through other means, right? Artificially damaged. I don't know what you mean by artificially damaged. The computer cannot log in because of a virus. Maybe the user cannot log in because of a virus, and that is undesirable. Okay. The computer cannot boot due to lack of hardware. I would put that improbable, right? Most of the time, your computer already has the hardware to boot up. So that's improbable, but that is not good. So it could be serious or disaster as well, because you do have to replace it now. Okay, so I guess we can head back to the Modius point. And thank you for sharing the risk matrices. Um, Again, just a reminder, you have to think about the perspective. Let's say you are the company, right? You are the system. What effects would it have on that system? So Modius point, let me stop here. Okay, you can start here. It says, what is the difference between default system accounts and using inbuilt system account? So the default system and inbuilt system, it looks like they're kind of the same thing. But if I'm gonna just try to explain my words, right? Default system account, let's say you have an application, you got an admin and a password 1234, a username admin and 1234, right? With the default, for sure, most of the time you can remove that and create a new one, right? When you say inbuilt system account, when I say, or the better word is maybe built in, built in. So it seems like it's also a default, right? But when you say built in, it means um, maybe you cannot just delete that type of system account, right? It could be similar to an admin. It might be a super user, right? It could be called system level as well, right? So yeah, they are kind of the same though. Isn't the password account set by initial manufacturer the same as built-in account password? Yeah, it's kind of similar. I was checking the textbook. I did not see built-in. So you can send me in the chat to see what chapter that is, and so I can go back to this and explain. Uh, from Harlan, in most of the internal networks of government agencies or enterprises, it is necessary to exchange information with the outside. Yes. If the entity is isolated from the network and the network is isolated, is there no risk of virus infection? Uh, I would say true right away. Um, it's like even in human virus, if you're isolated to humans, you'll not get the virus. Same with computers or systems. If that system is not connected in the same network or um, same, let's say a nation's network. Um, I can show more of that. Hold on. One, nine, and okay. Hold on. I'm just gonna do my browser. So we have different types of computer network, right? And let's say we are used to using personal area network like Bluetooth, like what else? Infrared, right? And local area network would be your the cables, the Ethernet cables, your Wi-Fi. It has a longer range, right? So if you're just in a local area network, right? And let's say you do have an isolated network that you don't connect to the internet. Again, I guess that is a big part because the internet is really more of like a global, right? But you do connect to the metropolitan area network called MAN. This is maybe through by city, by state, right? Or by a small country, right? And then now you move on to wide area network, which includes the global, right? And again, Even though the internet is public, the metropolitan area network could isolate its network or internet, right? So that itself is isolation and you not get the virus. Business continuity timeline is very useful. It can complete the repair step in advance after the system and other services are analyzed, thus greatly reducing the required recovery time. Yeah, for sure. The more you have plans, the more you can restore your normal business operations. From Eden, regarding risk measures, my view is to formulate a series of measures to prevent it and to abandon part of the property to fill the vulnerability when risks are unavoidable. Okay. To fill the vulnerability, I can't quite understand. So you abandon part of the property of, I guess, of an asset to fill the vulnerability when to maybe decrease vulnerability when risks are unavoidable. So I want to know companies like Apple, Microsoft, Google handle risk. Do they also follow the dread principle? They could follow it, but again, they do have their own standards that they also create and also share to the public. An example is the Microsoft Stride, where it defines spoofing, tampering, repudiation. Remember the non repudiation. So this is the attack, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, elevation of privilege, right? And that is basically what they usually look into at. Why did I do that? So I want to click that link. Okay. Okay, that was kind of annoying. Okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and click that link. Open a browser. Microsoft Strike. And where are you? Okay, here. Okay, so Microsoft Stride, right? It was created as part of the threat modeling process. Okay, it aims to basically identify each violation, right, to a threat and the target for a property that's being affected, right? So spoofing affects authenticity of the data, right? Tampering affects integrity of the data. Repudiation, you all already know the non-reputability. Information disclosure is confidentiality. Denial of service is availability. Elevation of privilege is authorization, right? So these are threats, and the right side is the corresponding um, properties for a good quality of a system, right, or of a data. What's interesting with this one is they also created the thread modeling, right, and also a card game. Go back to the PowerPoint. So they even create like a very nice card game for the Stride, right? Interesting part is it's not really for playing. It's more of like using it for your day-to-day job, right? If you maybe mention an asset in the meeting and maybe you have this series of card and you can just say, okay, we can talk about tampering, right? And you just play that card, right? So again, you can also maybe buy it and play it with your friends, but mostly it's used for the work environment. They also have a threat modeling tool, right? Um, and as you can see, you would identify your users, your firewall, right? The system, and you would create these boxes, and the dotted lines are basically the boundaries, right? The internet boundary. So what this is saying is your system or your application, the trading web app here in the middle, right? That is the one that maybe play for a current slide. Yep. Nope. Let me hide this one. So let's say you have the app here, right? And let's say an external user would access, it goes for the firewall first, and before it can even enter, right? From the outside to the inside. And you can also define your databases here and create like entry points and boundaries. Another similar diagram, right? That you always have these internet boundaries, the curve one, and that is defining how, which is outside of a maybe local network, right? Okay, more modest point. I think the most interesting topic is risk management. In order to better deal with risk decisions for the organization's operating environment, this way the risk can be minimized. Okay. After reading the chapter, I have a puzzle. If the device keeps the latest version, and then there's there is a vulnerability in one of these versions, will it be fixed soon? Then maybe, however, during this period, you said the device can be, I think, vulnerable if I do not update the device. This is repeating it, so maybe without that. Over, yes. So first to answer this, yeah, I guess the whole question, you are right. So if you put the latest version, there might be new vulnerabilities that no one knows. Okay. Um, However, do note that whenever the device ha- tries to push a latest version, there could be two things. One is it is giving off new features, right? Or maybe they're trying to fix a previous problem or a vulnerability. That's why they want you to upgrade to the latest version, right? So I think most of the time, um, companies would say if this update is critical. If they say it's critical, you should go ahead and do it because they already know that there's a known vulnerability and you can get attacked anytime. Can I use the CMD? That's already the command line. Command prompt, I guess, command prompt line to remotely control other people's computer? Yes. So last time I already showed you that I have SSH to a server, right? And that's already Um, that's already controlling other people's computer. So you don't really need to see the desktop view, right? Which is the graphical user interface. You can do everything in the command prompt or terminal, and Microsoft also have the PowerShell as well. Risk assessment is very important in both business and network. Of course, there are some risks which needs to be dealt with. If these enterprises do not avoid or terminate those risks, their companies may face bankruptcy. True. Likelihood is more subjective and qualitative, correct? Probability is more objective, correct. Okay. They also cause a problem for people to choose for measuring. But I still don't understand what's the difference between qualitative and quantitative. The two are used together, but could you give an example, right? So again, qualitative can one of the good example is, let's say you hired someone new, a risk manager or a cybersecurity expert, right? They may come into your business and say, "Oh, based from my experience, this wouldn't work," right? Based on my gut, this wouldn't work. So it's more like experience and a gut feeling that is most likely true, but not really explained by data, right? If it's something that data cannot be explained right away, but it does happen on a somewhat regular basis, therefore you can say that it's qualitative in nature. Another example, right? A qualitative data could be using survey, right? Let's say you want to see how others are doing uh, their cybersecurity practices, let's say, and then you put out a server on how people use certain security application. Let's say an antivirus software to make it easy, right? So you made a survey, right? You don't have any quantitative data, so you go qualitative. You ask people how effective is the antivirus software. So that itself now, when you got the data from the survey and you choose to present that, that's now qualitative. The reason why is it's backed by subjective answers, right? It's a yes and no. Put a 1 to 5 rating, right? What's the likelihood for you, and then you collect that, right? And then again, quantitative is something that you can monitor. If let's say the same thing, you ask the effectiveness of the antivirus software, and then you do have data to show that it scans and basically kills computer viruses, and you have the data to show that through monitoring and logging, then yes, you can put that as quantitative. Can constant modification and improvement effectively reduce risk? Is the existence of risk inevitable, right? Improvement really does reduce risk, right? Because one thing that you would know is, even though let's say you plan for uh, something happened that you did not plan for, but because you were always trying to plan things ahead, maybe you are more aware, right? Maybe you can know how to act quickly, even though you didn't have a plan for that scenario. This is usually a common question when, let's say, countries go to war, right? People would ask, I mean, maybe soldiers would ask, why do we need a plan if most of the time as well the plan doesn't work, right? The generals would say failing to plan is just going to be failure, right? If you start planning, at least you start doing things in a structured way, right? You get to see things more, you get to react to things more better, instead of having no guide or structure at all. So that's one of the ways that can help, right? The risk is inevitable for sure. There's always risk in everything. Can we eliminate risk completely through the methods described in the article? Yes, if you can do risk avoidance, right? Then you completely eliminate the risk. However, it is good to think that if you did avoid the risk, the next thing is you introduce new levels of risk, right? Let's go back to the data center problem. You didn't want your data center to be built in that island because of tsunami, right? Or big waves that can flood it. You now put your data center where, right? You think of, okay, let's put it in the mountain, right? And you can only move it around so much. So you eliminated the flooding risk or the tsunami risk 0%, but now you introduce new risk, right? If you put it on top of the mountain, well, mountains do sometimes uh, crumbles, right? They have falling rocks. The land can suddenly crack, right? Or maybe putting a data center in the mountain increases a lot of cost and risk for people building the data center in the mountains. So again, you can eliminate risk to zero, but most of the time you would introduce another risk, right? So next is from Joffrey. The loopholes in the web page, okay? The examples cited are also deeply rooted in the hearts of the people. When you accidentally browse a web page that has been implanted with a virus, deliberately, you can say um, it's already intentional, it's implied, so you can say just implanted with a virus. It is easy to steal personal information and files on the hard disk of the computer. Okay, yeah, I agree. We all know there are risks and loopholes in network attacks, right? Everyone has a motive. Some people will attack us with scripts. What is our defense method? If not, what are measures to be taken to prevent their invasion? We go back to the defense layer of defense, right? They call it defense in depth, that type of layering of defense. And just remember the Swiss cheese defense layer as well. You make sure that you add layer without the same holes, right? Next is from Faye. Who defines the standard balance of risk, acceptance, and tolerance? Good question. It's the business owner, right? Because they're the ones who's doing decision making. They're the ones who has the resources. So they're the ones who you should ask for the risk appetite, right? You would start asking, are you okay with this risk? Do we take an action or not? At the end of the day, it's up to them, right? Let's say even tsunami. If the business owner, well, I accept that risk. So, well, there's nothing you can do about it. He's the one who owns the organization, right? But again, one thing to minimize those I don't care scenarios is again with laws and regulation, they may say that well, you have to have, let's say, fireproof walls or something fire extinguishers to be in place so that the risk or maybe the impact of the damage gets reduced, right? And then moving on, because different countries, different races, and different age group have different acceptance and tolerance of risk. Very true, right? Same goes with dealing with our money, our own money, right? You would say some people in the East or in the West, some of them may save more money, some of them may spend more money, right? Some of them may invest in more risky investment. Some of them do not, right? So it's, yes, it's true. It's human behavior. But then again, we need to have the standard. So the standard is the minimum level, which is the laws and regulation, right? So I guess that's why at the minimum we do have like international laws as well that can cover for those some of the risk. This chapter mainly talks about various derivatives of risk. Okay. I am more curious about how to define the severity of risk. Um, we mentioned that in the lecture. If you see it impacts a lot of a big financial loss, when we say big, it is relative to the organization's maybe the cash flow, right, or the profit. If 1 billion is the damage, the financial damage, but let's say the company earns like 100, maybe 200 billion, so that is maybe not severe to that organization, right? Whereas let's say 100,000 financial loss to a small business worth 500,000 is very severe. Okay. And again, one of the things as well is losing reputation. Next is, I think the reason why many people don't pay attention to these things is because they think that the situation of being attacked and suffering heavy losses is a small probability event. Yes, yes, most people still think this way. Don't want to pay attention too much for it, so that they don't want to pay too much for it. Uh, hold on. It's either you can say don't want to pay attention too much for it, or you can say pay attention. Okay, so I think the existence of hackers can promote the development of network security in this regard. Yes, the more uh, the more threats out there, for sure, the more defense that we can basically come up with. Perhaps this is the reason for increasing to the behavior of some people. Yeah, and let me just Google what do you mean by increasing. That's such a deep term. So acquiescing is basically accepting something reluctantly, but without protest. So it's the same thing as I don't like, let's say, I don't like my president, but I don't do anything about it. Next is when we launch a new product, we all do a risk assessment. Yes, actually, it is before we launch a product, right? We already create a risk assessment. The products we can release are low risk ones, and not true all the time, because if you're in business, we do have this called blue ocean strategy, right? Where you release a new type of product in the market. It's very risky, meaning people can accept your product or no one would like your product, right? So, so examples for that is, let's say before when they released the iPhone, right? Also, for example, Netflix, when they started their streaming services, that is a high risk, right? Because you don't know if people would love to adopt it right away, meaning people would buy it right away. I'll give you another perfect example. So, virtual reality, right? Um, Virtual reality is something new that people are now buying, right? But thing is, before we already have virtual reality in Nintendo. The very old Nintendo used to have virtual reality. Hold on, if I can find that. Uh, Okay, I'll now show you because this is more like product management slash. Let me show my. So back in the days, let me just double check what year was this. So see, 1995, Nintendo already created a virtual reality type game, right? It's a new product. However, because the market was not ready for it, or maybe the technology is not that good, but still, it's virtual reality, right? And this product failed, right? Because again, it's a risk. It's a new thing that they introduced. Uh, Maybe they could have done more market analysis for that, right? Another thing that high risk, right? Let's say you want to oil in the Middle East, right? That is very high risk but high reward. So don't forget, if you do a high risk, there's also high reward. If people jump into the Nintendo Virtual Boy before, definitely they would have earned a lot of profits, right? And this, you're correct. You have to always re-improve and redo risk assessment. And I guess this is saying that, yeah, so this can be further clarified. So now I understand the whole message with this. Our products will be safer. So we can do risk assessment for the safety of the product. So now I understand the topic right away in the first sentence, right? And then again, maybe before we launch a new product, we can do a risk assessment for the safety-ness of the product. Yeah, in that way, and okay, that way I understand you're talking about safety all the time. Okay. How do hackers achieve identity theft? I have encountered similar things. A friend who hadn't used QQ for a long time suddenly sent me a message to borrow money or sent some malicious website. Well, highly likely, subjective, highly likely that it could be identity theft, but there's also the chance of a person maybe trying to trick you, right? What should I avoid? What should I do to avoid my identity being stolen? Is before clicking to that malicious website, if you can copy paste the URL, and I believe there are a lot of websites that can check when you paste a URL if it's malicious or not. So that can help you greatly. Trojan Horse is like a computer virus, like an assassin. It often tries every means to hide itself or attach to other programs. Once the program has started, the Trojan attack starts to attack your computer. So I want to know what other computer viruses can use special means to attack computers. So there's a lot, like the so with the malwares, there's a lot. Like before, there's an interesting virus. Let me check if I still remember. Okay, so this is an interesting. Let me go back to my browser. In 1971, there's what they called a creeper virus. Creeper, like the same in Minecraft, but not really. So the creeper virus is a self-duplicating program, right? Which was very interesting because what it will do is it will basically go to a printing system or a fax machine, I think, and it will print, "I'm the creeper, catch me if you can," right? And this type of virus, what it would do is it will basically jump to another device until it can do a print or maybe show an output. But when it jump from another device, um, it will already be gone, right? So it can cause damage, but that was not the intention. It was like a test or a prank, right? So this is a type of virus where it jumps from system to system, right? And again, Trojan is really bad when there was like torrent file sharing. So if you check, Trojan Horse is basically from I think mythology before, right? Where they basically gave a present of a wooden horse, and basically the other city or the other castle accepted the gift without knowing that there were soldiers inside the wooden horse to basically plan an attack. In Hong Kong, there was a famous scandal which was caused by storage media about public figure Edison Chen. So there was a famous scandal which was caused by which which there was a famous scandal, we can say, caused by leaked information from a storage media about the public figure Edison Chen. So what should we what is the what is I think we should say, what is the best way to dispose of our storage media, right? So again, we mentioned this already. The best way is to just hammer it down. That's it. No more problems. Why can hackers find system vulnerabilities without knowing the source code? Quick answer is they have tools. So the tools themselves can find vulnerabilities. So I showed you yesterday Kali Linux. If you just click off some of those tools would be the one to identify the vulnerabilities in the system. You don't even have to touch code, right? On the internet, more complex password will better protect my account, correct? The password should contain uppercase, lowercase, symbol, numbers, just numbers, not just numbers. A short password containing letters and numbers is better than a long password containing only numbers. For sure, only containing only numbers is not really safe. But I think now it changed that if you do have a long password phrase versus password complexity, I think is still better, right? So I'll quickly show you that because that's been the talk for many times already, that they're mentioning that it's better to have long password instead of like a short complex password, right? And still in 2020 that they're still mentioning that one, right? And what it's saying that instead of using short complex password that is hard to remember, consider using a longer passphrase, right? This involves combining multiple words into a long string of at least 15 characters, right? And why? They say it's harder to crack, right? The longer the password, even though it's simple words, because it's very long, it will take a lot of time and computational resource to be hacked, right? So here are some examples, right? This is the short, and you could basically forget it. I think this is like leet speak, could be. So here's an example, right? 4 words in a phrase, 4 common random words, right? Okay, maybe I zoom out a little bit. So here's the comparison. The first one is the complex one, right? So you have password complexity. For the attacker, it takes them 3 days at 1,000 guesses per second. So it's 2 to the 28. So it's still easy given the computational resource we have. And also for the user who has this password, it's hard to remember, right? What they're saying right now is to use a longer passphrase, maybe a 4 common words, right? And it would take 550 years at 1,000 guesses per second, which is 2 to the 44. So for the attackers or the system botnets, it is harder to crack and easily to remember for the person, right? To the muddiest point. So that's I believe that it could be also be subjective, but that's what I've been hearing in the news a lot, right? Because we can give a quick example here with, let's say, I have like CTU, Gen, instructor, cyber, right? It's very long. It's harder to crack, right? But I can remember this for me all the time. Or maybe random is better as well, right? So I can say CPU, let's say mouse, let's say Zelda, and let's say Genshin Impact, whatever, right? So this is better and longer to crack. So maybe I'll just add there, put that example back. Longer passphrase, maybe better. Maybe CU, Genshin Impact, Samurai X, something like that, whatever. So from Zio, without a complete cyber defense program, large companies and enterprises will not appear to be full of loopholes, will appear to have to have because they're not going to be something, they will be, right? They will have full of loopholes. The reason for that is you already mentioned that it is already without a complete cyber defense program, so they already have this property which is full of loopholes, right? Subordinate employees cannot be regulated out of the code of conduct, and human negligence will bring convenience to cyber attacks. Okay. I think technical control and program control can change the configuration of hardware or software. Okay. Okay, so I'm just reading. Um, oh, so is there a question here? Hold on. I think technical control is generally configured by computer users, and program control is generally designed by program developers to easily use technical control to change hardware. Okay, I would say yes too. Um, and let's see if we can quickly check that part though. I guess procedural and technical, right? And physical. Okay, so that's the muddiest point, and we'll spend the remaining time to finish our concept test. Apologies, I think last time I sent the concept test 4, so that's fine. We'll just use the concept test 3 today. And then hold on. That Google Chrome. Concept test 3, and it should be easy. And it looks like I can open it this way. It's funny because we are talking about risk assessment and services not being able to be used. And it looks like that the online version of the Microsoft is having some problems. Right? So let's go to that one. Okay. So for the concept test 3, um, try to answer and we'll expect your responses. I'll paste that here and I'll put the vote again. And just remember, we do check everyone's responses. And if you don't have a submission here, I mean, in the chat on your responsive, you get to have automatic 0 points here. And for concept test, there's no late submission here. If you're not here, you can't take it, right? As for the muddiest point, sure, if it's late, you just get deductions and also knowledge check and hands-on. So make sure to send your assignments on time. This is not only helps me to give you guys feedback, right? It also helps your Shenzhen faculty, which is Miss Monica and Dr. Dong, to basically be on time as well. Right? And so for me, an additional task is I would basically be checking your hands-on, right? And while I'm checking your hands-on, I'll also check your writing and make some comments there. So while we're on this topic, doing the concept test, I'd also like to mention an example, right? Looking for in um, the writing, right? So this is an example from one of my students before in a different class, right? So the purpose of the writing is basically to explain yourself clearly, right? Okay, excuse me. So if it says summarize, right? If I said show 5 commands, don't just list the commands and maybe just show them some of the options that you can do, right? Try to explain it in a sentence or paragraph. The reason why is I really want everyone to improve their communication writing, right? Because most of the time, if you end up working, let's say with English counterparts, you have to try to write clear and concise, right? So another advice when you start writing your summary is make sure that you think about the other person. They don't know that technology or that command, right? So that helps you explain better. The reason why as well is you would now think, how can I explain this very simple without using a lot of words, right? If you can do that, you'll be an excellent communicator, right? And even if you're going to use other language, that would be great as well, right? So again, don't think because uh, Clark is your instructor in cybersecurity, I can just throw random technical terms and he'll understand. No, I'll put myself as a perspective of someone who doesn't know that term and I'll start reading. If I didn't understand that as a normal person, again, that would give more deduction. So I look forward more to simple explanation, right? Because there are two things. Which is more valuable? Someone who wrote very technical, but I couldn't understand, or someone who wrote less technical, but the structure or the writing is clear? You'll definitely choose the other one, right? The clear one, right? And then you can just improve your adding more technical terms, right? Instead of like you become very technical right away and I just don't understand what's happening. Okay, just remember, you won't get deductions for simplifying your words. As long as it makes sense, as long as you're improving, that helps you, right? Because again, one of our goals is to improve your English and using it in a technical manner, right? Again, that's why I'm saying this is very important. Oftentimes, we talk to tech managers, and the number one skill that they want is knowing how to communicate properly, right? Through talking and through writing as well. Okay, so that's for the hands-on practice. And let's go back to the concept test. So if we can see. Okay, so I guess I'll give guys time to maybe 20 minutes to I'll just do 15 minutes. 15 minutes for this concept test, and then I'll be back and we'll start reading the concept test together before we end the class. So I'll see you in 15 minutes. Most of the students chose E. Okay. Most of the reasons were not in the category, not in the textbooks. That is correct. However, if you also listen to my lectures, hackers are not necessarily attackers, right? The logic doesn't make sense, right? A hacker, an attacker is a hacker, right? But a hacker can be an attacker or can be not an attacker, can be a defender or a white hat. So it's a maybe. So you can still be correct on saying that it's still a an attacker, right? But as you can see, I've already put a thumbs up of some. I chose C because hacker originally meant programmers, right? Good. There's another one that I saw. Hacker maybe doesn't have the attack behavior. Yes, right? So now, just to show you, where was that? Was that here? Okay. Okay, let me try again. Share. Okay. So a hacker is in fact not an attacker. So always keep that in mind. That not when you say hacker, it's bad right away. A hacker is someone who tinkers with computer systems, so messes around with computer system, and breaks them down like like a puzzle, right? So if I love to play around with my CPU, hardware, software, you can also call me a hacker, right? I just play around with it. Um, just to give you again, one thing that you have to know, everything is only textbook based, right? So this is an official document from GAO, which is to show you is the Government Accountability Office of the United States, right? So they have also defined right key concept. An insider we already know. Let's say that there's an employee, right? They are authorized to use the system, but they become an insider threat if they use it for bad things, right? A nearsighter is an unauthorized, right, user. So that alone is bad now, right? That's an attack who has physical access to or all or part of a system. Just an example, someone taking a tour of a Navy ship would be a nearsighter. So that's another new term, right? In CDU as well, we always promote to for people to check outside of the textbook and check in the internet as well. Because again, most of the resources now we do look at it in the internet, right? So I don't know if you guys can access, but I'll send this in the chat. Then you guys can just search the term nearsighter, right? And read all about it. And again, this is an official document from a U.S. government. Right? So, what else? So, just a recap, what we've done is we've learned various risk assessment categories, the impact and likelihood, those terms. So, do remember that threat and risk are sometimes interchanged. But when we now talk about risk management, threat is basically like danger, right? To, for example, an asset that has a vulnerability, right? And that when you combine threat and vulnerability, it could create the impact and likelihood. And when you combine them together, it becomes a risk. And just a reminder that you always need to do an inventory first, right? Before you can do risk management or assessment, you have to do some identification. And after you've done identification, you would now ask ask your business owner what is the scope, right? To know how much and the cost or how long this assessment would take. And then once you know the cost, you should know that by that time, you should not be looking elsewhere. When I say scope, let's say your manager or a boss said that create a risk assessment for, let's say, our website, right? But then you started doing risk assessment for the website plus the office space, right? And that is beyond the scope. Then that is called scope creep, meaning your scope is so wide that you couldn't get the job done, right? So remember your scope from the sponsor or the business owner, whoever is requesting that. Then once you have the scope, you start planning, and then you do the planning, and then you execute and then evaluate, right? And as always, you want to put matrices. The reason why is um, you should give this information to your boss or manager, and for them as well, they can easily spot like which ones are critical, which one should be acceptable, which one should we pay attention to, right? And again, it's up to their decision on what do they want to handle or not handle, right? And there's many ways to handle by avoiding, right? By sharing the risk, right? By doing nothing, right? And at the end of the day, it's a continuous process where you always try to assess, right? Every period, okay? And again, it's just hard to the only thing that would be hard is something that you don't know yet, right? And that is called a 0 day vulnerability, or when it becomes an attack, it becomes a 0 day attack, where it basically means it's a new type of threat, right? Again, an example of that is, let's say, COVID-19. That's a perfect example, right? That is a 0 day threat, or again, disease, because it's a new thing, a new virus, and no one knows yet how to handle that. especially in the first few days, weeks, or months, right? So that's the same thing in the cyber security world. And again, risk assessment does not only belong to cybersecurity, it does belong to all other industries, financial, healthcare, and so on and so forth. And risk management has a separate domain as well, like a separate specialization, just so you know. Okay, so I hope you become more aware and use it in your daily lives as well, right? Before doing something risky, you can think about, is it worth it? Do I get a good return, right? So it's like when you're playing, like I used to play League of Legends a lot, like, so if you're going in for the kill, it's very high risk, it's also high reward. But the other thing that you have to think about, if you do end up failing to do the attack correctly or completely, right, you do get to have a big disadvantage. Now, that big disadvantage, if you're okay with that, it means your risk appetite for that certain risk is okay, right? So you have to learn your own risk appetite, your boss's risk appetite, and again, risk appetite could be different. And again, in terms of for your own lives, if you do want to save money as well, right? If your risk appetite is high, meaning you can, it's fine for you to take in more risk, maybe you can invest in the stock market or in the currency foreign exchange. But if your risk appetite is very low, think of it's like you don't want to really lose a lot of money, or again, the other way around is it would earn a lot of money, but you don't want that risk. So you can just end up saving money, maybe in the bank, maybe in the uh, time deposit savings or government bonds, right? So those are safer investment vehicles for low risk appetite. Okay. So again, just so you know, you can basically use this in every aspect of your life. Okay. So hopefully you learned a thing or two in this lesson, and um, I would say, I would like to say stay risky, but no, stay safe all the time. And I'll see you guys tomorrow. And till then,